This is Philadelphia 76ers Now by Chat Sports. I'm your host, Chase Senior. Hope all of Philadelphia had a great weekend and your weeks are off to a phenomenal start. We have another awesome show on tap for you all today, taking a look at some cheap free agents who the Sixers can sign to round out this roster as they look for their first championship going back to the 1980s. As for what the Sixers have done so far throughout this offseason, traded for D'Anthony Melton, a move that I really like. They signed P.J. Tucker, really good defensive player who brings toughness to the table. Daniel House, a really good wing who Daryl Morey and James Harden know very well. In addition to P.J. Tucker going back to the Houston Rockets days, they brought in Trevelyan Queen, who frankly was pretty bad during the NBA Summer League. We'll see if he cracks this roster. And they re-signed James Harden. As for the areas of need still left on this Sixers team, backup center. It's been a problem for a little while for Philadelphia behind Joel Embiid. You need more bench scoring because you always need more bench scoring. I think D'Anthony Melton is going to be able to fill that void, but especially at the wing spot, you could use another addition or two, and the Sixers don't have a lot of money to mess around with. Not too much flexibility there. Right now in the NBA, 22nd in cap space, they're going to be a luxury tax team minus $58 million, so not a lot of wiggle room to sign these free agents. That's why on today's show, we're taking a look at some of the cheap ones. Before we do that, I want to hear from you because I appreciate the basketball knowledge from my home city. How would you grade the Sixers offseason? A, B, C, D, or F? Let me know right now in the comment section. Some potential cheap additions for the Sixers. We want to start off here with Dennis Schröder, a playmaking point guard who has a little wiggle, has some quickness, but man, his stock has really fallen given where it was at a couple years ago when he was competing as being one of the best six men in the NBA. Now, last year, he started with the Boston Celtics after signing that one-year, $5.9 million deal. He got traded to the Houston Rockets, and that acquisition that brought Daniel Tice back to Boston and sent Schröder packing, and he was really just okay. My problem with Schröder is just the lack of efficiency and some of the dumb decisions that he makes from time to time. But as a backup point guard, and that's the key term here, backup point guard who can also play a little bit off ball. I do like the versatility there. He can be serviceable, has some quickness, can get to the rack. Once upon a time, he was a decent spot-up shooter. That part of his game has kind of waned over time, but he could still knock through some buckets from downtown. 11 points per game last year. The assist numbers, second highest in his NBA career. Highest that it's been in a really long time, but again, the shooting efficiency, a little bit of a problem for Dennis Schröder. 39% from the field, sub 33% from three, but if you could bring him in on a cheap contract, maybe he bounces back and you get some really good value there. Now, we'll continue to break down this list, but first, make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you're a Sixers fan or you're just a big NBA fan looking to stay in the know with all of the happenings going on around the league, when the Sixers make a move, if they make any of these signings, we talk about it. We have you covered. 7,764 people subscribe to the channel just past the year mark. Let's continue to grow, closing in on 10,000 subs. YouTube.com/76erstv, or simply hit that red subscribe button down below. Cheap free agent number 2. Jeremy Lamb, who last year shot around 30% from three. We'll take a look at the numbers coming up in just a few moments, but also another guy on this list who I want to compare Jeremy Lamb to because they offer you wing depth for a playoff level team. It's Tony Snell. Now, you look at the numbers last year for both of them, and 2 years ago, Tony Snell was just automatic from the free throw line. He actually played pretty well. Last year, though, Tony Snell wasn't getting a lot of run on a really good New Orleans Pelicans team. For Jeremy Lamb, it's the same conversation that we just had with Dennis Schröder. At UConn, Jeremy Lamb looked to be a stud. He was a first-round pick. Expectations were very high. He's had a couple of good years throughout his NBA career, but he's kind of flatlined as the game has changed a little bit, taking more precedence with that three-point shot, and he's failed to really develop that three-point shot. Last year, 7 points per game, 38% from the field. Not going to cut it. 32% from downtown, 17 minutes per game. Now, if he gives you, let's say, 13 to 15 minutes with less shot opportunities, could the numbers increase to a certain degree? Tony Snell is a longer and taller player who is probably the better spot-up three-point shooter. He can be a rotational piece who gives you a few minutes per night on a playoff team. But as you can see, the number's certainly down there. If you had to pick one, There's a reason why they're both still available on the free agency market and why they're both cheap free agent targets. Who would you go with? TS for Tony Snell, JL for Jeremy Lamb. Embrace debate and pick one right now. I've actually started to become a little bit more intrigued with the idea of backing up Joel Embiid with Hassan Whiteside. Now, he is not the player who he was when he got the bag, secured a nice little payday not long ago with the Miami Heat. From that point, it became clear early on in that Heat contract that the game had started to pass him by, and there wasn't really much of a value placed on guys like Hassan Whiteside, who are rim protectors, good rebounders, good shot blockers, but basically can't do anything else. But again, as a backup to Embiid, you can certainly do worse here. And the Sixers in years past have done worse. DeAndre Jordan was playing significant playoff minutes and starting for the Sixers when Embiid was out last year against the Miami Heat. That's a problem. Greg Monroe a couple of years ago, as we've discussed here on 76ers Now, that also not ideal. Hassan Whiteside can still give you some productive minutes, and he was solid behind Rudy Gobert last year. A rebounding machine, really good shot blocker, 8 points per game, nearly 8 boards, almost 2 blocks per night. And while he doesn't shoot the basketball or offer any floor spacing to any degree, 65% from the field, operating a little two-man game, throwing down some dunks off the alley-oops, and just being a big presence out there, he can also give you pretty solid burn and some pretty solid value. And backup center has always been a problem with this Sixers team. And you can't always count on Joel Embiid to play the full slate of 82 regular season games, and we've seen in the playoffs he's gotten banged up. You have to be able to count on somebody else to fulfill those center minutes. Now, I'm fine with Paul Reed being on this roster, and frankly, I'd like to see Paul Reed play more than a guy like Hassan Whiteside, or if you want to target and bring in DeMarcus Cousins. I like the length, athleticism, the energy of Paul Reed. Just has to control it a little bit more. And if he's able to do that, he could be a pretty solid big, and he can even shoot the three a little bit. And honestly, in today's NBA, that positional versatility and his length, athleticism, quickness, and the short area bursts, he can get out to the three-point arc and guard some of these really good offensive players during the course of a playoff series. But again, after Paul Reed, got to bring in a better backup center for Joel Embiid. So we just went through some cheap free agent targets, and we talked about some of the biggest areas of need for the Philadelphia 76ers. What do you think is the biggest area of need? Let me know right now. Now we want to shift gears to Kevin Durant, and we'll hit on this really, really quickly. But a team in the division, not that divisions really matter anymore in the NBA, but a fierce rival for Philadelphia, and that does matter, is pursuing Kevin Durant. That is the Boston Celtics. According to Shams, Celtics offered Jaylen Brown for Kevin Durant, and the Nets said no because the trade package not necessarily ideal. This coming from Woj and Shams, as Brooklyn, and they look at this Kevin Durant trade request, and it approaches its fourth week. The Boston Celtics have emerged among teams engaged in talks on a possible KD deal. This coming from Shams, the Celtics have offered a Jaylen Brown package to the Nets for Kevin Durant, which Brooklyn turned down and countered. Now, you won't find many better players out there than Jaylen Brown in a trade package for KD. Here's the problem for Brooklyn, though. They're not really getting much else outside of Jaylen Brown, and the Celtics are going to have to up their offer, maybe include Marcus Smart, maybe even Grant Williams and Derek White, and maybe even a draft pick or multiple draft picks if they want to bring KD and team him up with Jason Tatum. Obviously, this would have direct implications on Philadelphia and its success this upcoming year because you have Jason Tatum and you have Kevin Durant on the same floor. Not only are they great offensively, they can be menacing defensively too. Keep in mind what the Celtics have also done. Brought in Malcolm Brogdon. So if you trade away Marcus Smart, you're able to absorb that blow. You signed Danilo Gallinari for $6.5 million per year as a really good three-point shooter on this roster. Al Horford, he could finally play again and was great on both ends during that playoff run. And Robert Williams is really the prototype for what you're looking for in centers for big guys who can't shoot at that position. So certainly interesting here for Boston as they have officially entered the Kevin Durant sweepstakes. And when it comes from Shams and Woj, you can take that as legitimate. Would you give up Jaylen Brown for KD? It's my final question for you before we get out of here. Why for yes and for no? It is hard to turn down Kevin Durant if you have to give up Jaylen Brown. JB 25, Kevin Durant 34 years old, but still, it's KD who we're talking about. Let me know right now.